Well, hey, this is our continuing education in the study of backs and saddle fit. So what we're wanting to do is just to talk about the backs a little bit more, talk about fit, even the anatomy of the horse becomes important because a lot of us don't even understand the anatomy. So I'm using this Breyer horse as a representative of conformation, so to speak. And so the front leg and the shoulder all really make one movement. Once that foot begins to come forward, even though there's several bones in effect, the top of the shoulder has soft tissue on it, cartilage. And so sometimes when we're leaving the dry spots and the white hairs, it's really on that cartilage. And sometimes cartilage, once it's damaged, it's a very slow process in getting it healed because there's not a lot of circulation in cartilage. And so when we begin to really concentrate on saddle fit from an athletic standpoint, then we really need to understand the anatomy that's kind of under the skin so that we know why it's important. Not just somebody says it's important, but that we are being able in our mind when we're looking at that shoulder blade to see what's underneath the skin. And so all of this is one motion. When the foot comes forward, the shoulder blade rotates back. And at the top of that is the soft tissue or the cartilage. And then when we get to this aspect of the width of the horse, this is what saddle fit is all about. Is it fitting how wide my horse is or how narrow my horse is? And the first teaching tool that we have besides the Breyer horse is these shells. These shells were actually taken off of horses' backs, and so this is like a certain size back, say. So when we look at it, this would kind of cut back to get behind the wither, and this part of the casting would come to go across the shoulder. And so we can kind of see the width behind, how wide. Really, this is not a wide tree. This is really suited for more of the narrow horse. And then the waist in there really kind of lets the rider's leg come down and actually, would give you leg room or a leg cut. This would go over the shoulder for not a very wide horse. The next one, I'll just put that one there and we'll kind of try to keep up with it, is a little bit wider. And these were all very comparably average type horses. This is going to be a range of 3 castings with average. All of these are kind of within that average range. And so we're getting a little wider, and even across the back, wider across the loin, which we don't always think about saddle fit across the loin, but because when you read in books that talk about movement of the horse, they use a term called recoil. And recoil is when they bring their hips up under them and really sit down on those hips to get ready to rate and to turn the barrel. So the back of the saddle has to be opened up enough to allow recoil to happen, and the front has to be wide enough to allow the shoulder blade to run. Now the widest of our casting is this casting. You can tell that we're wider across where the gullet would fit on the saddle. and we're wider in the hips. A lot of times we don't really think about those hips being important, but what happens, the riding books will use a term called recoil. And that term means when the horse brings his hips up under his body in order to get power to rate or power to turn. He's going to kind of push his back up underneath the saddle, and he's going to really drive that back end up under him. And so when that back comes up, they call that recoil, and the back of the saddle has to be open enough for recoil to happen. Because if we're really sitting down that back of that saddle on those kidneys, then in that kidney or loin area, then what we do is we're putting pressure on the very point of where we're wanting him to roll. There's so much pressure there that it makes his back drop out, and when his back drops out, that's when his head comes up. And I'll tell you from my experience, there's not a bit that we make or can design that will keep that head in place when that horse is getting too much pressure underneath that saddle. It becomes a bitting issue and then a control issue. And so when you really look at these three castings, we have the narrow and the medium and the wide. You know, I get calls all the time, people wanting quarter horse bars. Well, what is that? The point of this measurement of when you say, well, how wide is it, is they measure from the inside of the gullet where the gullet attaches to the bars to the other side. And that's your gullet measurement. But what that measurement really does is it produces an angle in the bar. And a lot of times we don't really understand it, and so we begin to ask questions about gullet width. And so if we just come down to our casting, you know, the bottom edge of the bar, I mean, there's a point of getting that too wide. You know, when you're here, you can get that too wide and everything just sits down on the inside edge. But if you say, well, we're going to establish the bottom edge of the bar, and that would be measurement from here to here. If we say, well, we can only get so wide at the bottom. So we're establishing that there is a point of getting too wide at the bottom. So when we come to our bars and we're creating this angle that fits this particular back, if I say, well, what are quarter horse bars, or I need a 7 or 8 inch gullet because my horse is wide, this part is established. But if we go to pulling the top out and we get that top out there too wide, that gullet measurement too wide, you see, now we've created pressure on the bottom edge of the bar, and we really let that saddle slip down to where we're really creating a lot of pressure on the shoulder blades, and we're digging in. So when we're pulling that apart, I mean, you know, even if we just pull it apart a little bit, you see how the pressure goes to the bottom edge of that bar. And so gullet measurement is not as important as the angle of the bar. We're trying to create angles that fit a particular type back. So when we're looking at saddle fit, what this measurement does is create an angle. And the angle has an established bottom measurement. This is pretty, there's a point of no return where you get too wide on the bottom. So the special is 12 and the Nuevo and the wide tree are 13, trying to stay within that range, but really what we're trying to do is create angles. Be sure I got my thing on there right. Trying to create those angles of what would fit the horse's back.